What do we want? When do we want it? What do we want? When do we want it?
Out of all aspects of your presidency that I think history is going to treat well, but people don't seem to know about it right now, is Jimmy Carter as conservationist.
We flew over the C&O Canal this afternoon, as you know, founded by William O. Douglas, one of our great justices of the Supreme Court.
You mentioned William O. Douglas and the C&O Canal. He used to do walks along that canal and used to jog around that canal. Did you have a route?
The C&O Canal was the best place to jog. That ultimately became a national park, as you may know, sponsored by William O. Douglas. But they had about a 12-foot wide, very smooth path that the horses used to walk on to pull the barges down the canal, and that's where I jogged. So it was a wonderful and isolated place.
And he started doing walks, hiking down the C&O Canal to save it, hiking in the Pacific Northwest, bringing consciousness to the need not to destroy a beach or a forest or a towpath or a lake.
Leading a protest hike in the Red River Gorge of Kentucky, canoeing the Allagash in Maine.
And these became as effective as civil rights protests at lunch counters. You know, suddenly a Supreme Court justice is out there walking 186 miles like a Pied Piper, law students following him, outdoor enthusiasts following him, and he was sending a very loud message, which was particularly heard within Washington, D.C. social society.
Douglas advocated for nature, give the natural world legal standing, which goes hand in hand with environmental justice.
America is greatly admired for many things. We're admired, I don't think, so much for our B-52 bombers and for our atomic stockpile, but we're really admired for the First Amendment and the freedom of people to speak and believe and to write, to have fair trials. The great magnet that America is the independence of thought and the right to dissent and the right to believe as you want, right? You see, the great thing about our Constitution, as I see it, is that people don't generally appreciate is that it was designed to take government off the backs of people, designed to make it difficult to do things to people.
In 1939, at 40 years of age, William O. Douglas was appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. One of the youngest justices ever confirmed by the Senate, he remained on the court until he retired in 1975. His 36-year service, the longest in the court's history, spans events from the Great Depression to Watergate. He wrote more opinions and more dissenting opinions than any other justice, over 1,200 in all. Douglas was a beacon for the preservation of wild places and individual freedom by both word and example. He developed a love for the outdoors when childhood paralysis led him to spend much of his time hiking the mountains around his Yakima, Washington home to strengthen his legs. As a justice, Douglas championed environmental causes and helped defeat highway plans at a time when many Americans were not receptive to these ideas. William O. Douglas was a world citizen, uninhibited about exercising his First Amendment rights, and openly criticized American domestic and foreign policy.
By the 60s, under David Brower, the Sierra Club takes over, and Douglas then works with the Sierra Club. And so he's going to all these wilderness conferences, Douglas. You have a Supreme Court justice at all these environmental meetings. And he knew how to get things done in Washington, so he could have a private word about a particular parcel of land with a thorny U.S. senator that was hard to get to. He was the wilderness movement's inside man. Without Bill Douglas, you wouldn't have Stuart Udall becoming Secretary of Interior in the 60s. He's the one who really got Bobby Kennedy excited about climbing mountains and rafting rivers and becoming an outdoorsman.
Talk about the Kennedys a minute. I remember you went off on a long trip through Russia with Bobby Kennedy. He was pretty young then.
I knew Bobby for some years prior to that, and Joe called me and said, "You going to Russia?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Could you take Bobby?" I said, "I'd be delighted." He said, "I think that Bobby needs some education in the world." So Bobby went, and he learned a lot. He grew. Bobby had a great factor of growth in him. I think he was on his way to the White House when he was assassinated.
Now, Justice Douglas, Bill Douglas, to a lot of us, was, I think, the greatest contribution the Supreme Court ever made to the environmental movement.
Through nature, he understood the concept of a creator. He was never foolish in the mountains because he understood the mountains. And that's where I think his desire to protect the mountains came from. He sought refuge in the mountains from his physical problems, but once he got there, he was taken back by the beauty of it all and began learning about it. And what he learned is that nature is fragile in spite of its majesty. He saw the mystery of the universe in a single flower, its construction.
Justice Douglas actually understood that environmental law had one purpose and one purpose only, and that's to keep humanity in compliance with nature's laws. But one huge failing of today's judiciary, whether it's the Supreme Court or all the other courts, is simply a failure to understand the higher laws. And Justice Douglas did that.
Well, you need the week to think about these problems, but you can be hiking while you don't need to stop thinking.
Can you do that? Can you keep the facts of a specific complicated case in your head as you're walking through the woods here, for example?
Oh, sure. That's the best way to solve a problem if you're confused. But I tell when I talk to lawyers, that you're never confused if you read the Constitution the right way.
On a societal level, the first thing we need to do is get people back into contact with nature. And then once people get out into nature, as Justice Douglas did as a boy, they come to love it because it's innate within us. It's part of our species programming.
With no one like Bill Douglas to argue the case for nature and the rights of nature that he was so concerned with. And all that I can hope is that somehow the spirit of Bill Douglas hovers over that building and those chambers and permeates the thinking the way it has not yet done.
Oh, he had critics, and that he went beyond what ought to be the limitations justices should recognize. They should impose upon themselves in commenting on public affairs. Bill Douglas always insisted he had a First Amendment right like any other American citizen, and he intended to exercise it, and he did.
The Congress shall pass no law abridging freedom of speech or press, and you and I take it to mean what it says. That's strict construction. Other members of the court over the years have said that when the Constitution says Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech or press, it really means Congress may make some laws abridging freedom of speech and press. The Constitution is not designed to leave things to Congress. If the president or the governor or a general or anybody else takes somebody by the neck and said, go to jail, go to Vietnam or whatnot, that's the business of the courts. That's not for the president or the governor or the general alone to decide.
Justice Douglas was an incredible jurist because, and this really reflects his brilliance, his major talent was in simplifying and clarifying the essential crux of the matter. And then he did so in poetic terms that really struck at the heart of people.
The mountains can be reached in all seasons. They offer a fighting challenge to heart, soul, and mind. A people who climb the ridges and sleep under the stars in high mountain meadows, who enter the forest and scale the peaks, who explore glaciers and walk ridges buried deep in snow. These people will give their country some of the indomitable spirit of the wilderness.
He had the ability to, what one of my old colleagues on the Court of Appeals used to say, of reaching for the jugular.
It was not uncommon for him to sit through an argument and size up what he thought the result was going to be, come off the bench and dissent what he knew, or dictate what he knew, and time would be a dissent, stick it in the drawer until the court opinion was circulated, and then 10 minutes later you'd have Bill's dissent. Many have, some at least, have suggested that they were too slipshod. I don't agree with that. I think many of his opinions withstand any kind of criticism, scholarly or otherwise.
I wish I had his writing facility, because he did it so quickly and so easily, and was able really to do it in many respects beautifully. I think his final letter of his departure letter that everyone writes when he retires is a thing of beauty, really.
My dear brethren, I am reminded of many canoe trips I have taken in my lifetime. Those who start down a watercourse may be strangers at the beginning, but almost invariably are close friends at the end. The greatest journey I have made has been with you, my brethren.
But I think his influence in awakening our consciousness at an early day to the value of our environment is one of his great contributions.